Constantinople, the year is 536. In the greatest city on earth, 500,000 people look up at the sky and something is wrong. The sun is up, but it gives no light, no warmth, no shadows. A pale disk hangs in the sky day after day, dim enough to stare at with the naked eye. A historian named Procopius records it. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during this whole year. He has no idea what is happening. Nobody does. In Italy, a Roman official soon records a sun that shines bluish and a summer without heat. In China, chroniclers report yellow dust falling like snow, and snow falling in the middle of summer, killing the harvest. In Ireland, the monks write 3 short, terrible words into their annals: a failure of bread. The sky stayed dark for 18 months, and that darkness was only the beginning. Within 5 years, it would help unleash the deadliest pandemic the world had ever seen, and bring the last empire of Rome to its knees. A Harvard historian who studies the past through ice cores and ancient DNA called 536 the beginning of one of the worst periods to be alive, if not the single worst year in human history. This is the story of why. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what was rising. Rome had fallen, the western half at least, but in the east, from Constantinople, Rome lived on. And in the year 527, it crowned an emperor who refused to accept a diminished world. Justinian, a peasant's son from the Balkans who clawed his way to the throne and set out to rebuild the Roman Empire, all of it. His armies, led by the brilliant general Belisarius, took North Africa back from the Vandals in a single year, then Sicily, then Rome itself. The Mediterranean was becoming a Roman lake again. At home, Justinian rewrote the entire body of Roman law, a code so influential it still shapes legal systems today. And in Constantinople, he raised the Hagia Sophia, a dome so vast that visitors said it seemed suspended from heaven by a golden chain. 500,000 people filled the capital. Grain ships from Egypt fed them. Silk, spice, and silver flowed through the ports. It was the most connected the ancient world had been since the height of Rome. An empire reborn, an emperor triumphant. And none of them knew that on the other side of the world a mountain was about to explode. Here is the thing about Justinian's world. Like every great civilization before it, its greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. Constantinople did not feed itself. It couldn't. 500,000 mouths depended on one thing: the grain fleet from Egypt. The most fertile farmland on earth, watered by the Nile, harvested on schedule, shipped across the sea on hundreds of vessels every year. It was brutally efficient, and it had no backup. The entire system rested on one assumption so basic that no one ever questioned it: that next year the sun would shine, the rains would come, and the harvest would arrive. For 1,000 years that assumption held. And there was something else about those grain ships. They didn't just carry wheat. They carried passengers, small, uninvited ones. Black rats, nesting in the cargo holds, riding the arteries of empire from port to port. For now, they were only a nuisance. The web that fed the empire, sea lanes, granaries, crowded cities packed tight behind walls, was a masterpiece of connection. But connection runs in both directions. Anything that entered the system would reach everywhere the system reached. Somewhere in the northern hemisphere, the best evidence points to a volcano in Iceland. The earth tore itself open. The eruption of 536 hurled millions of tons of ash and sulfur into the upper atmosphere, where the wind smeared it across the sky of the entire northern half of the planet. A veil thin enough to see through, thick enough to dim the sun. Global temperatures fell off a cliff, the start of what scientists now call the coldest decade in more than 2,000 years. The evidence is written in the trees. From Irish oaks to Scandinavian pines to the bristlecones of California, the growth rings of 536 are so cramped, so starved of summer, that scientists can spot the year at a glance. Crops failed from Ireland to China. Snow fell in summer. Harvests died in the fields, not for 1 year, but for 2, then 3. And then around 540 it happened again. A second massive eruption, this time in the tropics, threw the climate back down just as it was starting to recover. 2 hammer blows in 4 years. Famine spread across 3 continents. Millions of weakened, malnourished bodies. Cities still packed. Grain ships still sailing. The system was still connected, and the trap was set. In the year 541, in the Egyptian port town of Pelusium, people began to die. Fever, swellings in the groin and armpits, buboes black and hard, death within days. From Pelusium it moved along the coast into Alexandria and onto the grain ships. In 542 it reached Constantinople. What followed broke every record of catastrophe the ancient world had. Procopius, the same man who had watched the sun go dark, now watched the capital of the world become a graveyard. At the height of the outbreak, he claims 10,000 people died in a single day. The dead outran the living. Burial pits overflowed. They filled the towers of the city walls with corpses and sealed them shut. Ships drifted at sea with dead crews. Even the emperor himself fell sick. Justinian, the man rebuilding Rome, lay in a fever while his empire held its breath. He survived. His world did not. The plague, we now know it was bubonic plague, the same bacterium as the Black Death, burned through the entire Mediterranean, and it did not stop. It came back in wave after wave for 2 centuries. The death toll can never be known. Some historians speak of tens of millions. Others now argue the numbers were far smaller, that the plague, however terrifying, may not have emptied the ancient world as drastically as once believed. The armies that were reconquering Rome ran out of soldiers. The treasury ran out of taxpayers. The grain fleet ran out of ports that weren't infected. Rome's rebirth died in the pandemic, killed in part by the very connections that had made the empire great. For 1400 years, all of this was a mystery. Chroniclers had described a dimmed sun, but no one could say why or whether the stories were even true. Then scientists started digging. Literally. In the 1990s, a dendrochronologist named Mike Bailey noticed that tree rings around the world collapse at exactly 536, independent physical proof that the chroniclers weren't exaggerating. Ice cores from Greenland sealed the case. Layers of volcanic sulfate at 536 and again around 540, the fingerprints of 2 colossal eruptions, frozen in the ice like a crime scene record. In 2018, researchers even found microscopic shards of volcanic glass in an alpine glacier, evidence, one team argued, of a high-latitude eruption, most likely in Iceland. The exact volcano is still being hunted, and the plague in 2013, geneticists pulled DNA from the teeth of 6th century skeletons in a Bavarian graveyard. The killer was identified beyond doubt, Yersinia pestis, the Black Death's older sibling. Piece by piece, the picture came together, and it was bigger than anyone had guessed. Not a bad year, a cascade, volcano, darkness, cold, famine, a weakened population, a connected empire, a stowaway bacterium. Every link in the chain made the next one deadlier. The eruption didn't kill the empire. The plague didn't kill the empire. The combination did, a natural disaster amplified through every connection the empire had built. Sound familiar? It should. It's the Bronze Age collapse all over again, 17 centuries later, on a bigger stage. The web, once again, was the noose. The Roman reconquest stalled, then crumbled. Italy, won at such cost, was lost again within a generation. The population of Constantinople may have fallen by nearly half. Decades later, one final ruinous war between Rome and Persia, fought by empires already hollowed out by plague and hardship, left both giants exhausted, leaning on their swords. And into that vacuum, a century later, came something no one in Justinian's world had foreseen: the armies of Islam remaking the map from Spain to India. The world we live in, its religions, its borders, its languages, still carries the shape of that remaking. Far to the north, the catastrophe left a different kind of mark. Generations of Scandinavians passed down the memory of a summer that never came, and some scholars believe it survives to this day, hidden inside Norse mythology, the Fimbulwinter, 3 winters with no summer between them. The prophecy of Ragnarök, the death of the gods, may carry the seed of a real event, the years the sun went dark. 536 wasn't the worst year because of one disaster, it was the worst year because everything a civilization depends on, sunlight, harvests, trade, cities, turned out to be one connected machine, and the machine could be broken. The people of that year looked up at a dying sun and had no way to know what it was. We know, we found the volcano in the ice, the famine in the trees, the killer in the graves. The question they couldn't answer, we now can. The question that remains is whether we'd fare any better. New stories from the deep past. Subscribe.